Good morning. How's it going, guys? Welcome to week number 5, lesson number 9 for Jack London's The Call of the Wild. We're definitely nearing the end third of the book here. So we've gotten through, in my book, 60 pages, and there's only 30 more to go, give or take. So we're really, we've done quite a number on the book so far. We're doing well. For homework, if you remember, I had you finishing chapter 5. Chapter 5's finish was pretty important. And also for homework, I had you attempting to find a symbol and then explaining how that symbol potentially relates to our own life here in the real world. I think the ending of chapter 5 was loaded with symbols, all of which would be of very good use to you. So I'm hoping that you all were successful with that homework. So for a quick review, Charles, Hal, and Mercedes and the pack of 14 dogs didn't do so well on the trail. Several of the dogs died from sheer exhaustion and starvation, and in a couple of cases, Hal actually had to kill the dogs with his revolver. Eventually they ran out of dog food and they were nowhere near done with their journey, so Hal sold his revolver and got some horsehide for food. That didn't do well for the animals, so a couple more died, and towards the end of this part of the story, there were only 7 and then 5 total dogs left to pull the sled. In the meantime, Hal, Charles, and Mercedes, riddled with their load of actual gear and also the load of their societal implications, were unable to acquiesce to the demands of the wild, and therefore ran into several difficulties. So it was not going so hot, to say the least. Buck, when they came into a camp, the camp of a man named Thornton, John Thornton, Buck's laid down. He was absolutely worn out. He could go no further. The winter ice was melting, and remember, they've been traveling along a river this entire time. The ice was melting, the spring was coming through, and Buck seemed to sense that whether he stays and gets killed by Hal, or he goes and gets killed by the melting river, he's going to die. And so he decided not to get up. As Hal is beating away and potentially going to kill Buck, Thornton steps in, and this is a new person, a new character who we've not really met yet. He's just been briefly introduced. He steps in and saves Buck's life. And Hal and Charles and Mercedes and the remaining 4 dogs push onward. They don't really fight for Buck. They don't have enough fight left in them. And within a quarter mile, they fall through the ice. And Buck and John Thornton watch them go. And it symbolizes, I think, a little bit of an end of part of a journey for Buck. Buck has made it quite far away from any civilized thing, and frankly got a bad dose of civilization on the way out. So that was the end of chapter 5. Sorry if you hear my cat meowing. She's trying to get attention, but you won't get pets until after the video, so she'll have to wait. And we'll start on chapter 6, For the Love of Man. If you want to follow along with the reading, please click the link that's in the video description below. All you gotta do is click it, and the book pops right up, and you can go to chapter 6. When John Thornton froze his feet in the previous December, his partners had made him comfortable and left him to get well, going on themselves up the river to get out a raft and saw logs for Dawson. He was still limping slightly at the time he rescued Buck, but with the continued warm weather, even the slight limp had left him. And here, lying by the river bank through the long spring days, watching the running water, listening lazily to the songs of birds and the hum of nature, Buck too slowly won back his strength. A rest comes very good after one has traveled 3,000 miles, and it must be confessed that Buck waxed lazy as his wounds healed. His muscles swelled out, and the flesh came back to cover his bones. For that matter, they were all loafing. Buck, John Thornton, and Skeet and Nig. waiting for the raft to come that was to carry them down to Dawson. Skeet was a little Irish setter who early made friends with Buck, and who in dying condition was unable to resent her first advances. She had a doctor trait which some dogs possess, and as a mother cat washes her kittens, so she washed and cleansed Buck's wounds. Regularly, each morning after he had finished his breakfast, she performed her self-appointed task, till he came to look for her ministrations as much as he did for Thornton's. Nig, equally friendly though less demonstrative, was a huge black dog, half bloodhound and half deerhound, with eyes that laughed and a boundless good nature. To Buck's surprise, these dogs manifested no jealousy towards him. They seemed to share the kindliness and largeness of John Thornton. As Buck grew stronger, they enticed him into all sorts of ridiculous games, in which Thornton himself could not bear to join. And in this fashion, Buck romped through his convalescence into a new existence. Love, genuine, passionate love, was his for the first time. This he had never experienced at Judge Miller's down in the sun-kissed Santa Clara Valley. While with the judge's sons, hunting and tramping, it had been a working partnership. With the judge's grandsons, a sort of pompous guardianship. And with the judge himself, a stately and dignified friendship. But love that was feverish and burning, that was adoration, that was madness, it had taken John Thornton to arouse. This man had saved his life, which was something. But further, he was the ideal master. Other men saw to the welfare of their dogs from a sense of duty and business expediency. He saw to the welfare of his as if they were his own children, because he could not help it. And he saw further. He never forgot a kindly greeting or a cheering word, and to sit down for a long talk with them, gas he called it, was as much his delight as theirs. He had a way of taking Buck's head roughly between his hands and resting his own head upon Buck's, shaking him back and forth, the while calling him ill names that to Buck were love names. Buck knew no greater joy than that rough embrace and the sound of murmured oaths, and at each jerk back and forth it seemed that his heart would be shaken out of his body, so great was its ecstasy. And when released, he sprang to his feet, his mouth laughing, his eyes eloquent, his throat vibrant with unuttered sound, and in that fashion remained without movement. John Thornton would reverently exclaim, "God, you can all but speak." Buck had a trick of love expression that was akin to hurt. He would often seize Thornton's hand in his mouth and close so fiercely that the flesh bore the impress of his teeth for some time afterward. And as Buck understood the oaths to be love words, so the man understood this faint bite for a caress. For the most part, however, Buck's love was expressed in adoration. While he went wild with happiness when Thornton touched him or spoke to him, he did not seek these tokens. Unlike Skeet, who was wont to shove her nose under Thornton's hand and nudge till he petted, or Nig, who would stalk up and rest his great head on Thornton's knee, Buck was content to adore at a distance. He would lie by the hour, eager, alert at Thornton's feet, looking up into his face, dwelling upon it, studying it, following with keenest interest each fleeting expression, every movement or change of feature. Or, as chance might have it, he would lie farther away, to the side or rear, watching the outlines of the man and the occasional movements of his body. And often such was the communion in which they lived. The strength of Buck's gaze would draw John Thornton's head around, and he would return the gaze without speech, his heart shining out of his eyes as Buck's heart shone out. This is beautiful, right? I mean, Buck has been through so much. He definitely enjoyed his time in the South, in the Santa Clara Valley at Judge Miller's place. And I don't think he was upset, and I can argue that the character of Buck probably wouldn't take back the experience with Perot and Francois, because they too were not super mean. All they did really was act as neutral vessels to teach him the lifestyle of the wild, which is to be the law of tooth and club, or club and fang. But I do think that Buck would probably not enjoy working with the Scotsman again, because that was darn hard work, and he was very tired by the end of it. And I don't think he would enjoy working with Hal or Charles or Mercedes again either, as that was near deathly work. But those things led him to where he is, which is really far immersed into the wild, and finally immersed with what seems like a family. And we're going to get to see how that plays out more and more, but I just have to say it's very nice to see Buck enjoying something. And also, through this enjoyment, we can immediately characterize John Thornton, because he hasn't really done much. We've just seen Buck's interpretation of how he acts, which is very personal with Buck, very friendly and compassionate, and same with the other two dogs. But John Thornton hasn't really done anything else besides save Buck and be generally nice to him. Yet, because of these two things, we can already characterize John Thornton as a good guy, right? He's somebody who we can definitely put our trust in to be a protagonist or a protagonist aid inside of this book. We're going to continue reading for a little bit, and I'll probably be leaving the remainder of chapter 6 to you for homework, but let's see how far we can get. For a long time after his rescue, Buck did not like Thornton to get out of his sight. From the moment he left the tent to when he entered it again, Buck would follow at his heels. His transient masters, since he had come into the Northland, had bred in him a fear that no master could be permanent. He was afraid that Thornton would pass out of his life, as Perrault and Francois and the Scotch half-breed had passed out. Even in the night, in his dreams, he was haunted by this fear. At such times he would shake off sleep and creep through the chill to the flap of the tent, where he would stand and listen to the sound of his master's breathing. But in spite of this great love he bore John Thornton, which seemed to bespeak the soft, civilizing influence, the strain of the primitive, which the Northland had aroused in him, remained alive and active. Faithfulness and devotion, things born of fire and roof, were his, yet he retained his wildness and his wiliness. He was a thing of the wild, come in from the wild to sit by John Thornton's fire, rather than a dog of the soft Southland stamped with the marks of generations of civilization. Because of his very great love, he could not steal from this man, but from any other man in any other camp he did not hesitate an instant, while the cunning with which he stole enabled him to escape detection. His face and body were scored by the teeth of many dogs, and he fought as fiercely as ever and more shrewdly. Skeet and Nig were too good-natured for quarreling. Besides, they belonged to John Thornton. But the strange dog, no matter what the breed or valor, swiftly acknowledged Buck's supremacy or found himself struggling for life with a terrible antagonist. And Buck was merciless. He had learned well the law of club and fang, and he never forewent an advantage or drew back from a foe he had started on the way to death. He had lessoned from Spitz and from the chief fighting dogs of the police and mail, and knew there was no middle course. He must master or be mastered, while to show mercy was a weakness. Mercy did not exist in the primordial life. It was misunderstood for fear, and such misunderstandings made for death. Kill or be killed, eat or be eaten. This was the law, and this mandate, down out of the depths of time, Buck obeyed. He was older than the days he had seen and the breaths he had drawn. He linked the past with the present, and the eternity behind him throbbed through him in a mighty rhythm to which he swayed as the tides and seasons swayed. He sat by John Thornton's fire, a broad-breasted dog, white-fanged and long-furred, but behind him were the shades of all manner of dogs, half-wolves and wild wolves, urgent and prompting, tasting the savor of the meat he ate, thirsting for the water he drank, scenting the wind with him, listening with him, and telling him the sounds made by wildlife in the forest, dictating his moods, directing his actions, lying down to sleep with him when he lay down, and dreaming with him and beyond him, and becoming themselves in the stuff of his dreams. Buck has finally gotten to a place where he can find introspection. This, too, is very representative of our coming-of-age stories, okay? Generally, a coming-of-age story is called a Bildungsroman in literature, and it's a story where, the protagonist or the main character starts off, let's say the main character is 10 years old, and then they get called to an adventure. They go on this adventure, and during the adventure, they learn a lot of lessons, like how to be a hero, and how to choose the right course of action, and how to be good at heart, and how to sacrifice, and how to be intelligent and cunning, and how to survive. And all of these important practical lessons they take back to their arsenal as people. And so when they come out of the adventure, let's say at 14 years old, so they go on an adventure for 4 years in the book. At 14 years old, when they return from the adventure, they're different. It's a coming-of-age story. They've aged, both like physically in the real world, they've aged, maybe grown taller, or gotten a deeper voice, or something like that. But they've also aged in maturity, and they've aged in wisdom, and they've aged in intelligence. And this kind of aging is something that we often do in the real world as well. But it takes introspection which means a look into the self. It's when you in your mind look into your own mind and your own self at your actions and decide who you are. Well, it takes that kind of introspection for those characters to recognize all the growth that they've gone through. And here too, Buck, although not a human, has gone through quite the journey and has dealt with quite a lot of things in order to survive and become who he is now. And he's passing that on with introspection. He's learning that he is wild, that he is cunning, that he can't be merciless, but that he does have the capacity still for love, that he's a hard worker and a leader, but he has, and he's compassionate to other dogs, but he has no problem fighting if he needs to. And this kind of thing that Buck has learned is the same thing that you are going to learn as you age throughout your life, and the same thing that Mr. Brooks is learning as he ages throughout his life. Maybe not the same exact things as Buck, because we live here in civilization, we don't live in the wild, and so our laws and rules are different, and our societal norms are different, but still, we are growing as we age, and as we have introspection, as we reflect back onto the trials and tribulations that we face, I think oftentimes you will find, and all of us in the world will find, that we've changed, and that as we grow older, we grow better and wiser and all those other things. Let's leave it right there. We're on the middle of chapter 6 here. For homework, go ahead and finish chapter 6 all the way up to chapter 7, and write me, please, a 10-sentence subjective summary of the chapter as a whole. So a subjective summary, if you remember, is a summary where you explain your opinion of certain events that happened. Now, this summary can be centered around a symbol, kind of how you did for the last homework. It can be centered around a theme. It can be centered around the plot as it has developed throughout the book, or any other myriad of things, but 10 sentences that give me a subjective summary of chapter 6 of The Call of the Wild. If you have any questions, please come to my Zoom chats every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in the morning from 8:30 to 9 a.m. or in the afternoon from 2 to 2:30 p.m. And you can also email me if you have any questions. Please continue to watch the videos and turn stuff in. We're nearing the end of the year and we're going to finish really strong, but we all have to participate. And if you do, you get entered into that drawing for a $25 gift card, which is pretty cool. So without anything else to say, I think that's it for today. I'll see you guys on Zoom, and otherwise I'll see you in my next video. Bye, guys.